My name is Phil Marshall, 68 years old, retired contractor who built my son Thomas a house as a wedding gift 4 years ago. Kept my name on the deed as a formality, never thinking I would need that power. Family means everything to me, which made what happened at that dinner last month so unbelievable. When your own son spits in your face, something breaks inside you forever. Where are you watching from today? Hit subscribe to see how I taught my disrespectful son the ultimate lesson about family values he will never forget. I was born in a blue-collar neighborhood outside Detroit. My father worked at the automobile factory, and we lived paycheck to paycheck. From the age of 14, I spent summers helping my uncle with his construction business. I discovered I had a natural talent for building things with my hands. The satisfaction of creating something solid and real that would stand the test of time gave me purpose. After high school, I apprenticed with a master contractor named Frank Wilson, who taught me everything about the business. Frank became like a second father to me, showing me not just how to build houses, but how to build a life with integrity. By 25, I had started my own small contracting business, Marshall Construction. I met Martha at a local diner where she worked as a waitress. She had the kindest eyes and the most genuine smile I had ever seen. We married within a year. Martha supported my dreams, working extra shifts while I built the business. We saved every penny, living in a tiny apartment above a hardware store. When Martha told me she was pregnant, I felt a mixture of joy and terror. How could I be responsible for another human life when we were just scraping by? But Martha had faith in me. She said, "Philip Marshall, you build things to last. That includes our family." Thomas came into our world on a cold winter morning in January. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and lungs that let the whole hospital know he had arrived. The moment I held him, I made a silent promise that my son would have opportunities I never had. He would never know the struggle of wondering if there would be enough food for the week, or whether the electricity might get shut off. I worked harder than ever, taking on extra jobs, extending my workday from dawn until well past dusk. Martha would bring baby Thomas to job sites sometimes so I could see him during lunch breaks. Those moments, holding my son with my calloused hands, smelling his baby scent mixed with sawdust in the air, were pure happiness. As Thomas grew, the business grew too. By the time he started school, Marshall Construction had a solid reputation in 3 counties. We had moved to a modest but comfortable house in a good school district. I still remember Thomas running through the empty rooms when we first bought it, his voice echoing with excitement. "Dad, is this really our house? The whole thing?" "Yes, son. I built houses for other people for years. Now we finally have one of our own." Thomas was a good kid, respectful and bright. He had Martha's gentle nature but my determination. When he was 8, he would follow me around job sites on weekends, wearing a toy tool belt I bought him. He would mimic my movements, pretending to hammer nails and measure boards. The crew called him Little Boss. Everything changed when Thomas turned 14. Martha started getting headaches that wouldn't go away. The diagnosis came like a wrecking ball. Stage 4 brain cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months to a year. My world collapsed, but I had to stay strong for Thomas. Martha fought bravely for 2 years. During that time, I saw Thomas grow up overnight. He would sit with his mother after school, reading to her or just holding her hand. He helped with her medications and made sure she ate. When my grief overwhelmed me, Thomas would put his hand on my shoulder and say, "She needs us to be strong, Dad." The day Martha passed, Thomas and I sat on either side of her hospital bed, each holding one of her hands. Her last words were, "Take care of each other. We promised we would." The year after Martha died was the darkest time of my life. I threw myself into work as a way to escape the pain. Thomas retreated into school and books. We were both grieving, but in different ways. Sometimes weeks would pass with barely a conversation between us beyond the essentials. I realize now I should have been more present for him, but I was drowning in my own sorrow. Thomas graduated high school with honors, earning a partial scholarship to State University. I had saved enough to cover the rest of his tuition. The day I drove him to college was bittersweet. I was proud of him, but felt like I was losing the last connection to Martha. "Dad," Thomas said as I helped him move into his dorm room, "thank you for everything. Mom would be proud of us both, I think." Those words meant the world to me. Thomas thrived in college, studying business and finance. During holiday breaks, we started to rebuild our relationship. We would talk late into the night about Martha, about his studies, about my growing business. Marshall Construction had expanded to commercial projects, and I now employed 30 people. When Thomas graduated with honors, I was sitting in the audience, clapping until my hands hurt. He had accepted a position at Berkshire Financial, a prestigious firm in the city. My son, wearing a suit and tie, working in a glass tower, was everything Martha and I had dreamed of. With Thomas settled in his career, I started thinking about retirement. The business was doing well, and I had loyal employees who could take over the day-to-day operations. At 64, my back ached more than it used to, and climbing scaffolding wasn't as easy as it once was. I sold the family home and moved into a comfortable condo closer to the city where Thomas worked. We would meet for dinner every few weeks, and it felt good to have my son back in my life. Then, Thomas met Jennifer Blackwood at his firm. She worked in marketing and came from what she called old money. The first time Thomas brought her to dinner at my condo, I noticed how she subtly examined everything, from my furniture to the photos on the wall. She was polite but distant, calling me Mr. Marshall despite my insistence on Phil. "Your son is quite the rising star at Berkshire," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I was surprised to learn his father was in construction. The way she said it made it sound like I collected garbage for a living. Thomas quickly changed the subject, but I saw something in his expression that bothered me, a flicker of embarrassment. After that dinner, Thomas spoke often about Jennifer. She had introduced him to her circle of friends, all from wealthy families with connections. He started mentioning names of exclusive clubs and restaurants I had never heard of. I was happy he was doing well, but something felt off about the new direction his life was taking. 6 months later, Thomas called to tell me they were engaged. I congratulated him and asked when I could meet Jennifer's family. "Well, Dad, they're having a small engagement party at their country club next weekend. It's very formal. I'm not sure it would be your kind of thing." I insisted on attending, and Thomas reluctantly agreed. The evening was uncomfortable from start to finish. Jennifer's parents, the Blackwoods, barely acknowledged my presence. Her father, a silver-haired investment banker, asked what neighborhood I lived in, then nodded with a tight smile when I told him. "Ah, yes. They're doing some interesting development in that area. Gentrification is such a mixed blessing, isn't it?" Throughout the night, I noticed Thomas adopting their mannerisms, laughing at inside jokes about people and places I didn't know. He seemed like a different person, someone eager to fit into this new world at any cost. On the drive home, I asked Thomas if he was happy. "Dad, Jennifer is helping me see what I can become. Her family has connections that can take my career to the next level. This is what success looks like." I thought success looked like being true to yourself and treating others with respect, I said. Thomas sighed. "That's very quaint, Dad. But the real world works differently." That was the first moment I felt like I was losing my son. When Thomas announced they had set a wedding date, I made a decision. I owned a beautiful piece of land outside the city that I had purchased years ago as an investment. I would build them a house as a wedding gift, a place where they could start their family and create memories like Martha and I had. I spent months designing the perfect home, putting all my expertise and heart into every detail. It would be my masterpiece, a legacy for my son. A 4-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch, home office, gourmet kitchen, and a basement I specifically designed to be converted into a workshop or playroom for future grandchildren. Every weekend and many evenings after running the business, I would be there, working alongside my best crew. My foreman, Joe, questioned me one day as we were setting the foundation. "Phil, this is one hell of a gift. You sure about this?" That's a lot of sweat equity to give away. It's for my son, Joe. What else am I working for at this point in my life? Joe nodded but looked concerned. Just make sure you protect yourself legally. Family business can get complicated. I took his advice and consulted with my lawyer, who suggested I keep the deed in my name for the time being, with a clear intention to transfer it to Thomas later. The arrangement would save on gift taxes and provide some protection until Thomas and Jennifer were more established. The house took 9 months to complete. Every nail, every board, every fixture was selected with care. I built secret features into the design, like a reading nook hidden behind a bookshelf in the study that was inspired by a childhood fantasy Thomas once shared. I installed the highest quality materials, often upgrading at my own expense beyond what the plans called for. This wasn't just another job. This was my heart taking physical form. 2 weeks before the wedding, I took Thomas to see the finished house. His reaction made every hour of work worth it. He walked through the rooms in stunned silence, running his hands along the custom woodwork, testing the solid oak staircase. "Dad, this is incredible. I cannot believe you built this for us." I showed him all the special touches, the extra insulation that would keep their heating bills low, the reinforced flooring in the attic so it could be finished later, the custom cabinetry in the kitchen. "The deed is still in my name for now, for tax reasons," I explained. "But make no mistake, Thomas, this is your house. I'll transfer everything to you officially in a few years when it makes the most sense financially. Whatever you think is best, Dad. I trust you completely." At the wedding reception, I gave a speech that left few dry eyes in the room. I talked about Martha, about our dreams for Thomas, and about the house that would be their home. "A house is more than wood and nails," I said, my voice breaking. "It's a vessel for your lives together, for the family you'll build." Every beam was raised with love. Jennifer seemed genuinely touched, embracing me warmly. "Thank you, Phil. It's more than we could have ever expected." For the first few months, everything was wonderful. I would visit for Sunday dinners, and Thomas would proudly show me how they were settling in, the furniture they had chosen, the paint colors Jennifer had selected. They seemed happy, and I felt like I had fulfilled my purpose as a father. Then subtle changes began. The visits became less frequent. Thomas would call to cancel at the last minute, citing work commitments or other obligations. When I did visit, Jennifer would make comments that felt like small paper cuts. "We're thinking of remodeling the kitchen," she said during one dinner. "The cabinets are a bit rustic for our taste." Those were custom cherry cabinets I had commissioned from a master woodworker. "The neighborhood is really coming up," she said another time. "The Richardsons next door just sold for way above asking price. Apparently lots of executives from Thomas's firm are looking in this area now." She never acknowledged that they had this house because I built it, not because they could afford it on their own. Thomas began to change too. He started dressing differently, speaking differently. He would use financial jargon around me, then look impatient when I asked him to explain. One evening, he corrected my table manners in front of Jennifer, something that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. "Dad, the salad fork is the outer one," he said with a nervous glance at Jennifer. I noticed other worrying signs. Photos of Martha that I had given them were no longer displayed. A handcrafted rocking chair that had been in our family for generations was moved from the living room to a spare bedroom, then disappeared entirely. About a year after they moved in, I met Jennifer's parents at a dinner party Thomas and Jennifer hosted. It was clear the Blackwoods still viewed me as an outsider. Jennifer's father talked over me repeatedly, and her mother asked if I found it difficult to adjust to polite society after working in construction all my life. What hurt more than their rudeness was that Thomas said nothing to defend me. In fact, he seemed to agree with them, laughing along at subtle jokes made at my expense. After that party, the invitations became even more infrequent. I would drive by the house sometimes, just to see it, to remind myself of the love I had put into every corner. Once I noticed extensive landscaping work being done, replacing the simple but elegant garden I had designed with elaborate formal plantings that looked out of place with the house style. When Jennifer announced her pregnancy, I thought it might bring us closer again. I was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. I started making plans for a handcrafted crib and children's furniture that would become family heirlooms. Jackson was born in spring, and he was perfect. The first time I held him, I felt the same rush of love I had experienced with Thomas. Here was another generation, another chance to create a legacy of love and values. "He has your eyes, Thomas," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Actually, he looks just like Jennifer's father," Thomas replied. I tried to be involved in Jackson's early life, offering to babysit, bringing thoughtful gifts. Jennifer usually had excuses why my help wasn't needed. The expensive store-bought toys I brought were accepted with tight smiles, while the wooden train set I spent months crafting was met with a dismissive, "How thoughtful, but we don't really have space for bulky toys." One day I arrived unannounced with homemade soup, when I heard Jackson was sick. Through the open window, I overheard Jennifer on the phone. "No, we can't make the Hamptons this weekend. The baby has a cold, and Thomas's father might stop by. He's been so clingy lately. I know he means well, but he's just not our kind of people, you know? Thomas has outgrown all that." I left without ringing the doorbell, the soup growing cold in my hands. Thomas's career at Berkshire Financial was advancing rapidly. He was promoted to senior analyst, then investment manager. Jennifer would proudly tell anyone who would listen that he was the youngest department head in the firm's history, though she never mentioned that her father served on the company's board of directors. Our relationship continued to deteriorate. I was invited to fewer and fewer family events. When Jackson turned 1, I learned about his birthday party through Facebook photos posted after the fact. When I called Thomas to ask why I hadn't been invited, he sounded distracted. "Oh, sorry, Dad. It was just a small thing, mostly Jennifer's friends from her mother's group. We'll do something with you next weekend." That next weekend never came. I sent gifts for Jackson regularly, trying to maintain some connection to my grandson. One Saturday, I dropped by with a handcrafted wooden rocking horse that had taken me 3 months to build. Thomas was at work, but Jennifer accepted it with her usual tight smile. "How traditional. We'll find somewhere to put it." The following week, I drove by their house and noticed the rocking horse sitting by the curb with the trash. I pulled over and rescued it, my heart breaking not for the discarded gift but for what it represented. The callous disregard for something made with love, for the connection I was trying to maintain. Thomas and Jennifer began extensive renovations on the house. They hired an interior designer who transformed the warm, inviting spaces I had created into something from a glossy magazine, all chrome and glass and stark white walls. The handcrafted details that made the house special were covered up or removed entirely. When I visited after the renovation, I barely recognized the place. The custom archway between the dining room and living room had been removed to create an open concept. The reading nook I built for future grandchildren had been converted into a wine cabinet. "What do you think, Dad?" Thomas asked, though his tone suggested he didn't really care about my answer. "Very contemporary, right?" "It certainly is different," I said, trying to hide my hurt, though I miss some of the character. Jennifer laughed lightly. "Character is just another word for outdated, Phil. We needed to bring this place into the current decade." Thomas changed the subject quickly, launching into a story about his latest business trip. As he spoke, I noticed he checked his phone every few minutes, clearly distracted. This had become our new normal, these shallow interactions, where neither of us said what we were really thinking. On my 67th birthday, Thomas forgot to call for the first time in his adult life. When I finally heard from him 3 days later, he was apologetic but dismissive. "Sorry, Dad. It's been crazy at work with this new merger. We've been working around the clock." Yet his social media showed photos of him and Jennifer at a concert the night of my birthday. I didn't mention it. The gulf between us was widening, and I didn't know how to bridge it. I tried to talk to him about our changing relationship several times. I suggested lunch, just the two of us, at a diner we used to frequent when he was in college. He reluctantly agreed but spent most of the meal checking emails and taking calls. When I finally broached the subject of feeling pushed out of his life, he became defensive. "Dad, I'm not a kid anymore. I have responsibilities, a career, a family of my own. I can't just drop everything to go fishing or watch baseball like we used to. I'm not asking for all your time, Thomas. Just some genuine connection." He sighed heavily. "Look, Jennifer and I move in different circles now. Our lifestyle is just different from what you're used to. It doesn't mean I don't care about you." But his actions told a different story. I learned from a mutual acquaintance that Thomas had joined an exclusive country club, the kind of place that had a 3-year waiting list unless you knew the right people. When I mentioned it casually, hoping for an invitation to see this new part of his life, he changed the subject. Christmas that year was particularly painful. I was invited to their home but discovered upon arrival that they were hosting a large gathering of friends and Jennifer's extended family. I was seated at a small table in the corner with an elderly aunt of Jennifer's who was hard of hearing and barely spoke throughout the meal. Thomas and Jennifer circulated among their guests, barely acknowledging my presence. At one point, I overheard Jennifer introducing Thomas to someone as first-generation successful, as though his background was some obstacle he had heroically overcome. The way she said it made it clear she considered me part of that obstacle. Later that evening, as guests mingled in the living room, Jackson ran up to me with a drawing he had made. It was the first real interaction I'd had with my grandson all night. As I admired his artwork, Jennifer swooped in and redirected him. "Come along, sweetie. Grandpa Thompson is looking for you." Thompson was Jennifer's father. I realized then that I was being deliberately pushed out not just of Thomas's life, but of Jackson's as well. I was being replaced by Jennifer's family, erased from my own son's story. After the holidays, I made one more attempt to reconnect. I called Thomas and suggested we go fishing at the lake, where I had taught him to cast his first line when he was 7. His response cut deep. "Fishing? Dad, I haven't done that in years. I've kind of outgrown those kinds of simple activities. Why don't you join us for drinks at the club sometime instead?" But the invitation to the club never materialized. Our interactions became increasingly strained and infrequent. I felt like I was watching my son transform into someone I didn't recognize, someone ashamed of his roots, eager to erase any trace of where he came from in pursuit of status and acceptance in Jennifer's world. In March, I received an unexpected call from Thomas. His voice had the forced enthusiasm I had come to recognize as his business call tone. "Dad, we're having a dinner party next Friday. Jennifer's boss and some colleagues will be there. We'd love for you to join us." I was surprised but hopeful. Maybe this was an olive branch, a chance to repair our relationship. "I'd be delighted, son. What time should I come?" "7 sharp. And Dad?" "It's fairly formal. I spent the next week preparing. I bought a new suit, my first in years, had my hair trimmed, and even splurged on an expensive bottle of single malt scotch as a gift. I wanted to make a good impression, to show Thomas I could fit into his new world if given the chance. I arrived at exactly 7, nervous but optimistic. Thomas greeted me at the door with a quick handshake rather than our old bear hug. "You look nice, Dad. Come in. Everyone's in the living room." I followed him inside, immediately noticing that the house had been transformed yet again. More art on the walls, new furniture that looked expensive but uncomfortable. The warm home I had built was now a showpiece, designed to impress rather than welcome. The living room was filled with well-dressed people holding wine glasses, engaged in animated conversation that stopped briefly as I entered. Jennifer approached, air-kissing near my cheek. "Phil, how nice. Let me introduce you to everyone." She led me around the room, rattling off names and titles. "This is Bernard, Thomas's division head. Angela from legal. James and Sophia, our neighbors from 2 doors down. He's in private equity." I shook hands and made polite conversation, feeling increasingly out of place. These people spoke a different language, filled with references to investments, exclusive resorts, and private schools I had never heard of. Jennifer stationed me in a corner with a glass of wine, then smoothly redirected the conversation whenever I tried to join in. When dinner was announced, I discovered I was seated at the far end of the table, away from Thomas and the guests of honor. Throughout the meal, I tried to engage with those seated near me, sharing stories about my years in construction and how I had built the very house we were sitting in. Each time I mentioned this fact, Jennifer would quickly interject. "Phil has such charming stories from his working days. More wine, anyone?" The food was elaborate but barely recognizable, tiny portions arranged artistically on oversized plates. I caught Thomas watching me anxiously as I navigated the multiple forks and unfamiliar dishes, clearly concerned I might embarrass him. Halfway through dinner, the conversation turned to politics and economic policy. One of Thomas's colleagues made a dismissive comment about working-class voters who don't understand their own interests. I felt I had to speak up. With respect, I was part of that working class for 40 years. We understand plenty. We just have different priorities and experiences. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Thomas jumped in quickly. "Dad has some unique perspectives from his, former career." "Former?" I said, confused. "I'm retired, Thomas, not ashamed. I built things that will last generations." Bernard, Thomas's boss, smiled condescendingly. "How quaint. I suppose there's some satisfaction in manual labor." "There's satisfaction in honest work well done," I replied. "In creating something real." Jennifer laughed nervously. "Dessert, everyone? We have a wonderful chocolate soufflé." Later, when the guests moved to the living room for coffee, one of the women asked about the house. "It has beautiful bones. Did you work with an architect?" Before Jennifer could answer, I said, "Actually, I designed and built it myself as a wedding gift for Thomas and Jennifer." Jennifer quickly corrected me. "Well, Phil provided the initial structure, but we've had it professionally redesigned, of course. Hardly anything original remains except the foundation." Thomas laughed along with the guests. "Can you imagine? My dad thinking he could build a house suitable for this neighborhood. Thank goodness for real architects and designers." The casual cruelty of his words stunned me into silence. This was my son, talking about the gift I had poured my heart and soul into as if it were some amateur effort to be embarrassed by. When the guests temporarily left the room to tour the wine cellar Thomas had recently installed, I tried to speak to him privately. "Thomas, why would you say that? You know how much work and love went into this house." His face hardened. "Dad, you need to understand. These people are important to my career. They don't need to hear about how my father is some blue-collar builder. I'm not some blue-collar builder. I'm your father. I built a successful business from nothing. I put you through college. I built this house that you're so eager to pretend came from somewhere else." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "This is exactly why I hesitated to invite you. You always have to make everything about you and your precious feelings. Do you have any idea how hard it is to overcome a background like ours in my industry? Every day I have to prove I belong in rooms with people who were born into this world. And you prove it by being ashamed of where you came from? Of who I am? You're embarrassing me," he hissed. "You don't fit in here, Dad. You never will." Jennifer was right. This was a mistake. I stood there, shocked by his words. "Your mother would be heartbroken to hear you talk this way." Something dark flashed in Thomas's eyes. "Don't bring Mom into this. She's not here, is she? She's not the one making things difficult for me right now." The guests returned, and Thomas immediately switched back to his charming host persona. I sat silently for the remainder of the evening, watching my son perform for these people who would never value him for who he truly was. As the night wore on, the alcohol flowed freely. Thomas became increasingly animated, laughing too loudly at every joke, clearly trying to impress Jennifer's boss. I noticed Jennifer watching him with a mixture of pride and calculation. When the conversation turned to family backgrounds, one of the guests asked Thomas directly about growing up. "So your father was in construction, but what about your mother's family? Any old money there?" Before I could say anything, Thomas answered smoothly. "My mother came from a good family in New England. Unfortunately, They had some financial reversals before I was born. It was a complete lie. Martha had grown up in the same working-class neighborhood as I had, the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress. I couldn't stay silent. Thomas, that's not true. Your mother worked as a waitress when I met her. Her parents were hard-working people who never had much money but gave us tremendous support when we were starting out. The table fell silent again. Thomas glared at me, his face contorted with rage. Why do you always have to contradict me? Why can't you just let me handle my own business relationships? I won't sit here and listen to you lie about your mother to impress these people, I said quietly. Thomas stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You know what, Dad? This is my house now. My life. And you're ruining it, just like you always do with your stubborn, outdated ideas about what matters. This house exists because I built it for you, I reminded him, keeping my voice level, with these hands, as a gift given in love. A gift with strings attached, he shouted, no longer caring who heard, always reminding me where I came from, what I owe you. Well, I've outgrown all that. I've outgrown you. The room was dead silent now, everyone watching the drama unfold. Jennifer made a weak attempt to salvage the situation. Perhaps we should all take a breath. But Thomas was beyond reason. Years of suppressed shame and resentment boiled over as he leaned across the table toward me. You want to know the truth? You embarrass me. Your clothes, your accent, your stories about building things. None of that belongs in my world now. I've spent years trying to distance myself from all that, and you keep dragging me back down. I stood up slowly, my heart breaking inside my chest. I never thought the day would come when my only son would be ashamed of me. What happened next is seared into my memory forever. Thomas's face twisted with contempt. He stepped toward me, drew back slightly, and deliberately spat directly into my face. The warm spittle hit my cheek and slid down toward my collar. Gasps echoed around the table. Someone dropped a glass. Jennifer covered her mouth in shock. Time seemed to stop as I stood there, spit dripping from my face, looking into the eyes of my son, a stranger filled with hatred. Without a word, I took my napkin, slowly wiped my face, placed it carefully on the table, and walked out of the dining room. As I retrieved my coat from the closet, I could hear Jennifer's mortified apologies to their guests, Thomas's angry muttering. No one followed me to the door. No one called after me as I walked to my car. I drove home in complete shock, unable to process what had just happened. My son, the child I had raised, loved and sacrificed for, had spat in my face in front of a room full of people. There was no coming back from that. Some lines, once crossed, change everything forever. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my recliner until dawn, staring at the wall, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. The look of pure contempt on Thomas's face. The deliberate, calculated insult. The public humiliation. On my side table sat a photograph of Martha holding infant Thomas. I picked it up, tracing her face with my finger. What would you do, Martha? I whispered. How did we raise a son who could do such a thing? I could almost hear her voice in my head. Martha had been gentle but firm in her principles. She believed in consequences, in standing up for yourself, in maintaining your dignity. Actions have consequences, she would say. That's how people learn. As the sun rose, I made my decision. Thomas had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. There had to be consequences, or he would never learn the lesson he so desperately needed. At 8 a.m, I called my lawyer, Alan Peters. Alan and I went way back. He had handled all my business matters for decades. Phil, it's been a while. What can I do for you? The house I built for Thomas and Jennifer. I never transferred the deed, did I? No. It's still in your name. We discussed doing it this year, remember? What are my legal rights regarding that property? There was a pause on the line. Phil, what's going on? Did something happen with Thomas? I briefly explained the situation. Alan whistled low. Legally, the house is yours. You can sell it, rent it, whatever you want. They have no claim to it unless you can show it was an outright gift with no conditions. Your name is on all the paperwork. And their belongings? Personal property is theirs. But the house and anything permanently attached to it, that's all yours. I thanked him and asked him to prepare the necessary paperwork for a quick sale. Then I called my friend Diane at Cornerstone Realty. Diane, I need to sell a property fast. No questions asked. I'm willing to price it 20% below market. 20% below? Phil, are you in some kind of trouble? No. I just need it done quickly and quietly. She agreed to list the property immediately. At that price point, she assured me it would likely sell within days. Next, I contacted Big Mike's Moving and Storage. Mike had been a subcontractor on many of my projects over the years. I need a full house packed up and contents put in storage within the next few days. The owners will be away until next Friday. That's a rush job, Phil. What's the situation here? It's family business, Mike. I'll pay double your usual rate if you can be discreet and efficient. With those calls made, I sat down to think through the details of my plan. Thomas and Jennifer were leaving the next day for a financial conference in Chicago, returning the following Friday. That gave me a 6-day window. I made a list of what would stay and what would go. All personal belongings, clothes, photos, Jackson's toys, important documents. These would be carefully packed and stored. Furniture, artwork, and decorative items would be sold with the house or donated. I wouldn't profit from their belongings, but I would reclaim what was rightfully mine. I also decided to set up a separate trust fund for Jackson with part of the proceeds from the house sale. My grandson shouldn't suffer for his father's actions. The trust would be structured so Thomas couldn't touch it, accessible only for Jackson's education and well-being when he turned 18. The realtor called back that afternoon with surprising news. A cash buyer, a tech executive relocating from California, had seen the online listing and made an offer sight unseen, conditional only on a basic inspection. They were willing to close in 3 days. The wheels were in motion now. The next morning, I drove by the house and watched from a distance as Thomas and Jennifer loaded their luggage into their BMW, Jackson in his car seat. They were heading to the airport, unaware that this was the last time they would see their home as they knew it. Once they were gone, I met the moving crew at the house. I had a detailed plan for them, marking which items were to be placed in storage and which would remain with the house. Everything gets handled with care, I instructed Mike's team. Pack as if it were your own family's belongings. For the next 2 days, the crew worked efficiently. I supervised personally, making sure all of Thomas, Jennifer, and Jackson's personal items were properly protected and documented. Clothes were packed in wardrobe boxes, Jennifer's jewelry carefully inventoried and secured, Thomas's collection of watches and cufflinks treated with proper care. The house inspection was completed quickly, revealing no issues that would block the sale. Alan prepared the closing documents, and on the 4th day, I signed the papers transferring ownership to the new buyer, a Mr. Lawrence from Silicon Valley. The proceeds were wired directly to my account, a substantial sum even at the reduced selling price. That same day, I met with a financial advisor to set up the trust fund for Jackson. I allocated 1/3 of the proceeds from the house sale to secure my grandson's future. On day 5, the moving company finished their work. The house was now empty, except for a few basic pieces of furniture the new owner had requested to remain. The walls were bare, the custom cabinets I had built empty, the wine cellar cleared out. It looked nothing like the warm family home I had created, or the showplace Thomas and Jennifer had transformed it into. It was just a shell now, waiting for new life. I walked through each room one last time, remembering the love and care that had gone into building it. In the kitchen, I placed a single envelope on the counter. Inside was a letter I had written to Thomas, explaining my actions and my feelings. It wasn't angry or vindictive, just honest and direct. I wrote, "Thomas, by the time you read this, the house will no longer be yours. I have sold it, as was my legal right as the owner of record. Your personal belongings have been placed in storage at City Storage on Pine Street, Unit 247. The access code is your birthday. I never thought it would come to this. When I built this house for you and Jennifer, it was an act of love, a gift from a father who wanted the best for his son. I kept my name on the deed as a formality, never imagining I would need to exercise that legal right. But when you spat in my face at dinner, you crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. That act of deliberate disrespect, in front of witnesses, in the very house I built with my own hands, demanded a response. I raised you to understand that actions have consequences. This is the consequence of yours. A portion of the proceeds from the sale has been placed in trust for Jackson's future education. He should not suffer for the failures of his father. The house you live in, the career you enjoy, the life you have built, all of it rests on the foundation I helped create. The opportunities you had came from the sacrifices your mother and I made. To watch you become ashamed of that, to hear you mock and belittle where you came from, has been the great heartbreak of my life. I hope someday you will understand that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn. And once lost, it's very hard to regain. Your father, Phil. I sealed the envelope, placed it on the counter, and took one last look around. Then I locked the door behind me and walked away from the house I had built with so much hope and love. That night, I packed my own belongings and made arrangements to move far away, where Thomas wouldn't easily find me. I had decided to make a clean break, to start over somewhere new. The next chapter of my life would be written on my own terms. I was 300 miles away when Thomas and Jennifer returned from their trip. Through a trusted mutual friend, I learned what happened when they arrived home. They pulled into the driveway late Friday afternoon, tired from their flight. Thomas used his key on the front door, but it didn't work. The locks had been changed. Confused, he rang the doorbell. A stranger answered. "Can I help you?" the man asked. Thomas stammered, "This is my house. Who are you?" "I'm Lawrence Kendrick. I purchased this property on Tuesday. I have the paperwork if there's some confusion." Jennifer pushed forward. "This is ridiculous. This is our home. There must be a mistake." Mr. Kendrick, to his credit, was patient. He invited them in and showed them the deed and bill of sale, all legally executed and notarized. Thomas immediately tried calling me, but my number had been disconnected. His next call was to my lawyer. Alan had been instructed to direct Thomas to the storage facility and explain that the sale was legal, but otherwise provide no information about my whereabouts. "Your father was within his legal rights, Thomas. The house was in his name. He ensured all your personal property was safely stored." Thomas and Jennifer, with nowhere else to go that night, checked into a hotel. The next morning, they went to the storage facility and found all their belongings, meticulously packed and inventoried. And they found my letter. My friend reported that Thomas read it silently, his face draining of color. When Jennifer demanded to know what it said, he handed it to her without a word. "He did what?" she screamed after reading it. "How could he do this to us? Where are we supposed to live?" The reality of their situation sank in quickly. They had lost not just their house, but a significant asset. The mortgage they thought they were paying had actually been property tax and insurance payments I had set up through an account in Thomas's name, far less than an actual mortgage would have been. Thomas called his bank and confirmed the bad news. They had nowhere near enough savings to purchase a comparable home, especially in that neighborhood. Their lifestyle had consumed most of his substantial income. Over the next few days, Thomas was seen visiting my condo, only to find it had been sold as well. He questioned my former neighbors, none of whom knew where I had gone. He went to Marshall Construction's offices, but the new managing partner simply handed him an envelope containing his mother's wedding ring and a few family photos I thought he should have. Thomas hired a private investigator, but I had been careful. I had moved to a small coastal town in another state, purchased my modest new home through an LLC, and started using my middle name, James, for day-to-day interactions. Meanwhile, Thomas and Jennifer's perfect life unraveled with surprising speed. They were forced to rent a small apartment while they sorted out their finances. The change in address and circumstances raised questions among their social circle. Jennifer's friends, it seemed, were conditional friends. interested primarily in their prestigious address and lifestyle. Jennifer blamed Thomas for the catastrophe. "How could you not make sure the deed was in our name? How could you risk everything by treating your father that way?" Their arguments became frequent and bitter. Thomas's performance at work suffered as he dealt with the stress and humiliation of their situation. A promotion he had been expecting went to someone else. 3 months after the house sale, Jennifer took Jackson and moved in with her parents. A month after that, she filed for divorce. Thomas spiraled further. He took a leave of absence from work, then eventually resigned. His identity had been so wrapped up in his success, his address, his status, that losing it all left him adrift. I learned all this in bits and pieces from mutual acquaintances. I did not reach out to Thomas, though there were many nights I lay awake wondering if I had done the right thing. Had my action been justice or vengeance? Was I teaching a necessary lesson or perpetuating a cycle of hurt? 6 months after I left, Thomas tracked down Joe, my old foreman, and begged for information about my whereabouts. "Your dad doesn't want to be found, Thomas," Joe told him. "He was heartbroken by what happened. Give him time." "I've lost everything, Joe," Thomas said. "My house, my wife, my job. I need to talk to him." "Maybe losing everything is what you needed to understand what really matters," Joe replied. A year passed. I built a quiet life in my new town. I joined a local woodworking club, made a few good friends, volunteered building houses for a charity. I never stopped thinking about Thomas and Jackson, but I had found a measure of peace. Then, on the anniversary of my departure, a letter arrived at my post office box, forwarded by Alan. "Dad, I don't know if this will reach you. I don't know if you'll read it if it does. But I have to try. I was wrong. So terribly, unforgivably wrong. Not just about that night, but about everything. About what matters. About who I am and where I came from. I've spent this year thinking about what you taught me growing up. Work with integrity. Treat people with respect. Be grateful for what you have. I forgot all of that in my rush to become someone I thought was better, more successful, more worthy. I remember watching you build houses when I was a kid, how you would point out that the foundation had to be solid or nothing built on top of it would stand. My life had no foundation because I rejected the one you gave me. I'm starting over now. I have a small apartment and a job at a local credit union. It's nothing fancy, but it's honest work helping regular people. I see Mom and you, in every customer who comes in, trying to make a better life for their family. Jennifer and I are divorced. I see Jackson on weekends. I'm teaching him to fish, and he loves it. I tell him stories about you, about the things you taught me that I was too foolish to value. I don't expect forgiveness. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. But I want you to know that the lesson was received, however painful. You were right. Actions have consequences. Respect must be earned. And I threw away the most valuable thing I had, a father's love. If you ever want to contact me, I'll be here. If not, I understand. With love and regret, Thomas. I read the letter 7 times that night, tears falling freely. Then I put it away and went for a long walk on the beach, thinking about forgiveness, redemption, and the complicated love between fathers and sons. It's been 3 years since I sold the house and walked away from my old life. 3 years of rebuilding, reflecting, and finding a new purpose. I bought a small cottage near the ocean, walking distance to a town that reminds me of where Martha and I first met. It's nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms with a wraparound porch and a detached workshop where I spend most of my days. A large portion of the money from selling Thomas's house went to the Martha Marshall Cancer Research Fund at the hospital where she received treatment. The director tells me the money has helped fund a promising new therapy. Martha would be pleased to know that something good came from all this pain. I've found peace in my new community. No one here knows me as a successful contractor or Thomas's father. I'm just Phil, the older gentleman who makes beautiful furniture and teaches woodworking classes at the community center. I've made genuine friends who value me for who I am, not what I can provide or what status I bring. My workshop has become my sanctuary. There's a simple joy in creating something with your hands, in seeing raw lumber transformed into something functional and beautiful. Lately, I've been making children's furniture, pieces designed to become heirlooms passed through generations. Though I left my old life behind, I never stopped thinking about Jackson. Through a trusted friend, I established a way to anonymously check on his welfare. I know he's healthy and doing well in preschool. I set up that trust fund for his education that Thomas can't touch. Someday, when he's older, perhaps we'll meet again. I've been making him a piece of furniture each birthday and Christmas, storing them carefully for a day when they might find their way to him. The letter from Thomas changed something in me. The anger I had carried began to fade, replaced by a complicated mixture of sadness, hope, and cautious optimism. I didn't respond immediately. Some wounds take time to heal, and I needed to be sure any reconnection would be healthy for us both. 6 months after receiving his letter, I sent a short note with a photo of a fishing pier near my new home. No return address, no commitments, just an acknowledgement that I had heard him and was thinking of him too. This experience has taught me difficult lessons about family, respect, and consequences. I've asked myself 1,000 times if I did the right thing. Was selling the house too harsh? Did I act out of wounded pride rather than principled teaching? I've come to believe that sometimes the hardest form of love is allowing natural consequences to occur. Thomas needed to understand that respect isn't an entitlement, but something precious to be maintained. That the way we treat people, especially those who love us, defines our character more than any possession or status symbol. In my quieter moments, I reflect on what true wealth means. It isn't the houses we build or the positions we hold. It's the relationships we nurture, the integrity we maintain, the kindness we show to others. Thomas had to lose his material wealth to rediscover these more important forms of richness. The dignity I reclaimed, by standing up for myself, has given me freedom I didn't know I was missing. For too long, I had allowed my love for Thomas to blind me to how unhealthy our relationship had become. By walking away, I not only taught him a lesson but liberated myself as well. Last month, I received another letter from Thomas. He wrote about his simpler life, how he's reconnecting with values he'd forgotten, how Jackson is thriving despite the divorce. He mentioned a community college course he's taking in carpentry, wanting to understand the craft I had dedicated my life to. I never appreciated what it meant to build something with your own hands, he wrote. Now I'm learning, and with each project, I think of you. I haven't decided yet whether to invite him here, to attempt rebuilding our relationship in person. Some days I feel ready. Other days, the memory of that dinner, of the contempt in his eyes as he spat in my face, still stings too sharply. What I do know is this: respect must be mutual in any relationship. Once broken, trust rebuilds slowly, like a house constructed brick by brick. There are no shortcuts. The foundation must be solid before anything else can stand. If Thomas and I find our way back to each other, it will be on new terms, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. If we don't, I've made peace with that possibility too. Either way, I will continue living with authenticity and dignity. Values I hope my example might still teach him. Looking at this old family photo of Thomas, Martha, and me from happier times, I feel a sad kind of peace. Life rarely follows the blueprints we design for it. Sometimes, the structures we build with the greatest care still need to be torn down and rebuilt. And sometimes, in the rebuilding, we create something stronger, truer, and more enduring than what stood before. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that hurt someone you loved because it was the right thing to do? What would you have done in my situation with Thomas? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more reflections from my journey. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the hardest lessons teach us the most valuable truths.